The metallic tang of old blood and hospital-grade disinfectant still clung to Sarah Jenkins' nostrils, a phantom scent she carried even after showering. Another 12-hour shift at Street Jude's ER had bled her dry, leaving her a hollowed-out husk navigating the treacherous currents of Friday night traffic. Rain lashed against her windshield, each drop a tiny percussion on the drumming headache behind her eyes. Her student loan statement sat on the passenger seat, a grim reminder of the financial quicksand she was perpetually sinking into. Today, she'd lost Mrs. Rodriguez, a sweet old lady who reminded Sarah of her own grandmother, to a sudden, aggressive cardiac arrest. She'd fought for her, pounded on her chest until her arms ached, but death had still won. Death always won in the end. Sarah sighed, the sound lost in the rhythmic sweep of her wipers. She just wanted to be home, curl up with a bad reality TV show, and forget the relentless parade of trauma, pain, and loss for a few precious hours. Then, a flicker. A sudden, violent kaleidoscope of headlights and screeching tires ahead. Her foot instinctively found the brake pedal, pressing down with a nurse's trained urgency, not a driver's panic. The highway, slick with rain, became a deadly ballet of metal. A sleek black sedan, moving with an almost predatory speed, swerved violently across 3 lanes, its rear tires losing traction. It didn't just clip, it annihilated a humble gray coupe, T, boning it with the sickening crunch of collapsing steel. The impact launched the coupe into the concrete barrier dividing the highway, a crumpled can of twisted metal and glass. For a split second, the world held its breath. Then, a gasp of orange and red blossomed under the coupe's crumpled hood. A small, hungry flame licked upwards, growing exponentially with each passing second, consuming oil and gasoline with terrifying speed. Sarah's breath hitched. Other cars slowed, their drivers craning necks, phones already coming out to capture the morbid spectacle. But no one stopped. No one opened a door. They were spectators, paralyzed by the sudden horror, or perhaps by the innate human instinct for self-preservation. Sarah was a nurse. Self-preservation was a luxury she rarely afforded herself when a life was on the line. Her own car, a sensible, slightly dented sedan, skidded to a halt on the shoulder, thankfully a good distance from the growing inferno. Her hand flew to the gear shift, yanking it into park. "No," she whispered, her voice rough. "No, no, no." Before her conscious mind could process the inherent danger, her body was moving. Adrenaline, that familiar, unwelcome surge that cut through fatigue and fear, was already coursing through her veins. Her emergency bag, meticulously packed with trauma shears, bandages, gauze, and a small, half-empty first aid kit she kept for minor scrapes, was ripped from her trunk. She slammed the trunk shut, the sound almost lost beneath the escalating roar of the fire. The rain was still falling, but it did nothing to quench the hungry flames now engulfing the front of the coupe. Black smoke billowed into the night sky, acrid and choking. Small, sharp explosions, like angry firecrackers, began to pop under the hood as fluids and components gave way to the intense heat. Sarah sprinted. Her worn scrubs, still damp from her earlier shower, clung to her. Each step was a defiance of the chaos, a furious refusal to let another life slip away on her watch. She could feel the heat radiating outwards, pushing against her, an invisible wall of pure, destructive energy. Her eyes, trained to assess danger and prioritize, scanned the wrecked vehicle. The driver's side was caved in, a mangled mess. The passenger side, though, was still largely intact, a pocket of fragile hope within the inferno. She peered through the shattered remnants of the rear window. A figure, slumped against the steering wheel, was visible. Male, young, unconscious. His head was lolled at an unnatural angle, and his leg was clearly pinned beneath the crumpled dashboard. "Hey!" she yelled, her voice raw, but it was swallowed by the roar of the fire. "Can you hear me?" No response. The driver's side door was jammed shut. The passenger door wouldn't budge either. The fire, already consuming the engine block, was now starting to lick at the dashboard, creeping closer to the unconscious man. Time was dissolving like sugar in hot coffee. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze her. But beneath the panic was a core of pure, stubborn resolve. She had to get him out. She looked around frantically. Her eyes landed on the first aid kit in her hand. A tire iron. She remembered seeing one in her trunk. "Always be prepared," her dad used to say. She sprinted back to her car, fumbled with the trunk latch, grabbed the heavy metal bar, and sprinted back to the coupe. The heat was becoming unbearable. Her hair, tied back in a messy bun, felt singed. Smoke burned her throat. She ignored it. She aimed the tire iron at the passenger window, the thick safety glass. Crack. It spiderwebbed, but didn't shatter. She hit it again, harder, putting her entire weight into it. Crash. Shards of glass exploded inwards, spraying onto the passenger seat. She cursed, careful not to cut herself on the jagged edges, and used the tire iron to clear the remaining glass from the frame. "Sir, can you hear me?" she shouted, leaning into the car, shielding her face from the heat with her arm. He was still out cold. His face was pale, smeared with blood from a head wound. She could see the unmistakable uniform beneath his jacket. Olive drab. A Marine. "Okay, Marine," she muttered, her voice trembling but determined. "Let's get you out of here." She leaned further in, risking singed hair and burns. Her fingers, trained to assess quickly, flew over him, pulse, strong but thready, breathing, shallow. Possible concussion, definitely. His right leg was clearly bent at an unnatural angle, pinned tight between the crushed dashboard and the seat. A compound fracture, maybe? Blood was already soaking through his pants. The flames were now dancing on the steering wheel, melting the plastic, the synthetic fumes choking. The inside of the car was growing dangerously bright. She had seconds. She gripped his arm, trying to pull him, but his leg was utterly stuck. She tried again, grunting with effort, but it was futile. His body was limp, heavy. She couldn't leverage him. "Think, Sarah, think!" Her eyes darted around the interior, desperate. The seatbelt. It was still buckled. She fumbled for her trauma shears, a trusty tool that had cut through countless layers of clothing and seatbelts. Snip. The belt parted with a satisfying snap. Now the leg. It was the only thing holding him. The heat was scorching her skin, making her eyes water. The air was thick with the smell of burning plastic and gasoline. She knew, with chilling certainty, that the fuel tank could go at any second. Come on," she whispered through gritted teeth. She braced herself against the doorframe, using every ounce of her remaining strength, her back muscles screaming in protest. She pulled on his torso, trying to shift his weight, to angle him just enough to free his leg. It was impossible. He was too heavy, too pinned. Then, a sudden, almost miraculous jolt. The entire car shifted slightly, probably from the weakening metal. It gave her just enough leverage. She pulled again, a desperate, guttural cry escaping her lips. A sickening snap sound echoed from within the car, but not from the fire. His leg, it was free. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing him under the armpits, she dragged his dead weight out of the passenger compartment. His body flopped against the ground, heavy and inert. She pulled him further, away from the car, away from the immediate danger, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming. She dragged him until they were at least 20 feet away, the rain a cold, blessed relief on her singed skin. She collapsed beside him, panting, coughing, trying to catch her breath. Just as she cleared the 20-foot mark, the entire passenger compartment erupted in a searing fireball. Flames shot 20 feet into the air, consuming everything within seconds. The sound was a concussive whoomp that vibrated through the ground. Sarah flinched, shielding her head with her arms. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the backdrop of the inferno. She looked down at the Marine. His breathing was still shallow, his pulse still thready, but he was alive. He was out. Professionalism took over. The adrenaline, instead of making her shaky, sharpened her focus. She ripped open his jacket, searching for other injuries. Head wound. Check. Fractured leg. Definitely. He probably had internal injuries, maybe a collapsed lung. She quickly applied pressure to the bleeding on his head with a clean bandage from her kit, her hands surprisingly steady. She checked his airway, ensured he wasn't choking. She laid him gently on his side, in the recovery position, making sure his head was supported. Sirens. Finally. Wailing in the distance, growing louder, closer. A wave of relief, so profound it almost made her weep, washed over her. She had done all she could do. She had bought him time. She had fought death, and for once, for this one life, she had won. She sat there, rain plastering her hair to her face, chest heaving, watching the orange glow of the burning car reflected in the slick black asphalt, waiting for the cavalry to arrive. The first flashing lights that pierced the chaotic gloom weren't from an ambulance, but a police cruiser. It skidded to a stop a safe distance from the blazing wreckage, its blue and red strobes painting the rain-swept highway in an eerie, pulsing glow. A uniformed officer, burly and grim-faced, emerged from the patrol car, a heavy-duty flashlight in hand. Officer Miller. Sarah recognized him from the occasional drunken disorderly who'd ended up in Street Jude's ER. He was known for being by the book, with a temper as short as his patience. He surveyed the scene, his flashlight beam cutting through the smoke and rain. His eyes landed on Sarah, crouched beside the unconscious Marine. Instead of relief, or even a flicker of recognition, his expression hardened. "Ma'am, step away from the victim," he barked, his voice amplified by the wail of approaching sirens, now a deafening crescendo. Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned. "Officer, I'm a nurse," she stated, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "I pulled him out of the car. He needs—" "I don't care what you are," Miller cut her off, striding purposefully towards them, his face a mask of official displeasure. "This is a crime scene. You shouldn't have touched anything. You've contaminated a potential— What did you take?" He squinted, his flashlight beam momentarily blinding her. "Did you take anything from the vehicle?" A cold knot formed in Sarah's stomach. This was the exact opposite of what she'd expected. She was covered in soot, rain-soaked, and shaking, her hands still faintly trembling from the adrenaline dump, and this man was treating her like a looter. "I took nothing, officer," she retorted, her own temper flaring. "I pulled him out seconds before that car exploded. He has a head injury, probable compound fracture to his right leg, and I suspect internal bleeding. He's unconscious. Get the paramedics!" Miller knelt, not to check on the Marine, but to shine his flashlight into the man's face. Then at Sarah's hands. He saw the faint traces of blood, the grime. "You shouldn't have interfered, ma'am. That's for trained professionals. You could have made things worse." "I am a trained professional," Sarah snapped, her voice rising in frustration. "I'm an ER nurse. There was no time to wait." The blare of ambulance sirens drowned out her protest. 2 ambulances and a fire truck pulled up, their flashing lights adding to the chaotic symphony. A flurry of activity erupted as firefighters began dousing the remnants of the burning car, and paramedics, clad in their bright uniforms, rushed towards them with their medical bags. The lead paramedic, a young woman named Brenda, who Sarah recognized from transfers to Street Jude's, quickly knelt beside them. "What do we have, Sarah?" she asked, her tone efficient, at least acknowledging Sarah's presence. Sarah quickly rattled off her assessment. "Male, probably late teens, early 20s, unconscious, possible concussion, significant laceration to the scalp. Right femur appears broken, possibly compound. Shallow breathing, thready pulse. I suspect internal injuries, possibly a collapsed lung given the impact. I managed to stabilize his head and stop the initial bleed from his scalp laceration." Brenda nodded, her eyes already scanning the Marine. "Good work, Jenkins. We'll take it from here." Officer Miller, meanwhile, was already conferring with another police officer who had just arrived. He kept glancing back at Sarah, a suspicious frown marring his face. He gestured towards her, clearly explaining something. Sarah felt a surge of indignation. She had just saved this man's life, and now she was being treated like a nuisance, or worse, a suspect. She watched as Brenda and her partner efficiently took over, affixing a neck brace, immobilizing the Marine's leg, carefully transferring him onto a stretcher. His military uniform was now more apparent, a grim detail she hadn't had time to focus on during the frantic rescue. He was just a young man in need of help then. Now, he was a soldier. As they loaded Corporal Evans into the back of the ambulance, Brenda paused. "We'll take him to Street Jude, Sarah. You coming with us? You're soaked and covered in soot." Sarah shook her head. "No, I need to go home. I'm off shift." She suddenly felt a profound weariness, the kind that settled deep in her bones after the adrenaline had drained away. "Just let me know Howie Island." Brenda gave her a quick, sympathetic nod before climbing into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and with another wail of its siren, the ambulance sped away, leaving Sarah alone on the slick, rain-soaked highway shoulder, surrounded by flashing lights, the acrid smell of burnt rubber and gasoline, and the lingering sense of injustice. Officer Miller watched the ambulance disappear before turning back to Sarah. "Ma'am, I'm going to need your statement. And your driver's license." His tone was flat, devoid of any appreciation, any acknowledgement of her heroic act. She gave him her information, her voice hollow. He took notes, his pen scratching against a wet pad, asking questions about the crash itself, not about her selfless intervention. When he was done, he handed back her ID without a word of thanks. "You're free to go, ma'am. But you'll be hearing from us regarding this incident. Unauthorized intervention on a potential crime scene." Sarah just stared at him, speechless. She wanted to scream, to ask him if he would have preferred she let the Marine burn to death. But she was too tired, too drained. She simply nodded, turned, and walked back to her car. The drive home was a blur of exhaustion and simmering resentment. She peeled off her soot-stained scrubs, dropping them in the laundry bin with a disgusted sigh, then stood under the hottest shower she could manage, trying to wash away the smoke, the grime, and the bitter taste of official disapproval. She finally crawled into bed, the image of the burning car, the Marine's pale face, and Officer Miller's accusatory glare replaying in an endless, unsettling loop in her mind. She expected to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange mix of pride in what she had done and a sudden, sharp ache of loneliness. She had saved a life, but it felt like the world was already moving to punish her for it. Morning dawned gray and sullen, mirroring Sarah's mood. Her body ached in places she didn't even know she had muscles, a grim souvenir of her roadside rescue. Her neck was stiff, her shoulders tight, and the lingering scent of smoke, despite the scrubbing, seemed to cling to her skin. She forced herself to make coffee, the rich aroma a small comfort in the desolate landscape of her apartment. She nursed the mug, scrolling through local news on her phone. No mention of the highway accident, no mention of a Marine, no mention of a nurse. It was as if it had never happened. She tried to rationalize Officer Miller's behavior. Cops were busy, underpaid, and constantly dealing with the worst of humanity. Maybe he was just having a bad night. Maybe protocol was that rigid. But the sting of his accusation still lingered, a cold, unpleasant sensation. A loud, insistent knock rattled her apartment door. Not a neighborly tap, but a firm, authoritative series of raps that brooked no delay. Sarah frowned. Who on earth? She wasn't expecting anyone. She pulled on an old robe, tightening the sash, and peered through the peephole. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing on her porch were two men in perfectly pressed Air Force Security Forces uniforms, their faces unreadable. And between them, towering over them both, was a man who radiated authority like heat from a furnace. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with iron-gray haircut razor short and an impossibly straight posture. His uniform, bedecked with an intimidating array of ribbons and a 3-star insignia on his shoulder, gleamed even in the dull morning light. A general. A 3-star general. Her mind reeled. A general? At her door? The Marine. Of course. They must be here to thank her, to finally acknowledge what she did. A small, hopeful flutter started in her chest. She opened the door, a tentative smile on her face. Can I help you? The general's eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned her, missing nothing. There was no warmth in them, no hint of a smile. His face was a chiseled mask of grim determination. He didn't offer a hand, didn't introduce himself beyond his rank. Miss Sarah Jenkins? His voice was deep, resonant, and devoid of any pleasantries. It was a voice used to giving orders, not exchanging niceties. Yes, she confirmed, her smile faltering. I am General Marcus Thorne, he stated, his gaze unwavering. We need to speak with you. He didn't ask if it was a good time. He simply stepped forward, an unspoken expectation in his demeanor, and the two security forces personnel flanked him, their expressions equally stern. Sarah instinctively stepped back, allowing them to enter her small living room. The air in her apartment, usually filled with the scent of coffee and old books, suddenly felt thin, charged with an unsettling tension. She gestured vaguely towards her worn sofa. Please, sit. General Thorne remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. The two security personnel took up positions near the door, like silent, unmoving statues. It was less a meeting, more an interrogation. Miss Jenkins? Thorne began, his voice flat, emotionless. We understand you were involved in an incident last night on Highway 97. Yes, Sarah said, feeling a prickle of annoyance. I pulled one of your Marines from a burning vehicle. She waited for the thank you, the formal appreciation. It didn't come. Instead, Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly. You interfered with a military asset, Miss Jenkins. Unsanctioned. Unauthorized. Who do you work for? What were you doing there at that exact moment? Sarah stared at him, utterly bewildered. Interfered? General, I saved his life? He was trapped, unconscious, and the car was seconds from exploding. I work for Street, Jude's hospital as an ER nurse. I was driving home from my shift. It was a complete accident that I was there. Thorne dismissed her explanation with a curt wave of his hand. Your presence was noted by local law enforcement. Officer Miller's report indicates you bypassed emergency protocols and intervened in what was clearly a volatile and potentially compromised situation. Compromised situation? Sarah echoed, her confusion deepening into indignation. It was a car crash. And what does military asset mean? He's a human being, General. A young man, a Marine. He is Corporal David Evans, Thorne stated, as if delivering a military directive. And his status, his mission, and the contents of his vehicle are classified. By intervening, you not only put yourself at risk, but you also exposed yourself to highly sensitive information. Sarah felt a surge of rage. He wasn't concerned about the Marine's well-being. He wasn't concerned about her safety. He was concerned about sensitive information. I saw nothing but a burning car and an unconscious man, General, she exclaimed, her voice rising. I was focused on getting him out alive. Is that not what you would want for your soldiers? Thorne's gaze hardened further. Your intentions, while perhaps misguided, are irrelevant, Miss Jenkins. What is relevant is that you were in a position to observe and potentially compromise an operation critical to national security. We need to know precisely what you saw in the vehicle. What did you touch? What did you take? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. What did you take? It was the same question Officer Miller had asked. Sarah felt a growing dread, a chilling realization that this wasn't about gratitude or even about reprimand. This was about control. I told Officer Miller, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. I took nothing. I checked him for injuries, I dragged him out, that's it. Thorne remained unconvinced. We have reason to believe otherwise. Corporal Evans was on a sensitive mission. His vehicle contained items of importance. Your unauthorized intervention raises questions. Serious questions. One of the security personnel stepped forward, holding a sleek, official-looking document. Miss Jenkins, General Thorne would like you to sign this non-disclosure agreement. Sarah took the document, her fingers trembling slightly. The legal jargon swam before her eyes, but the core message was crystal clear. You are legally forbidden from speaking about this incident, Corporal Evans, or our visit here today, to anyone. She was being gagged, silenced. You want me to sign away my right to talk about saving a man's life? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper, disbelief warring with outrage. You are being ordered to comply with national security protocols, Miss Jenkins, Thorne replied, his voice chillingly devoid of emotion. Dissemination of any information regarding this incident, no matter how seemingly innocuous, could have severe consequences. For you, for Corporal Evans, for national security. He didn't threaten her with a raised voice or a pointed finger. But the implication was clear, heavy, and undeniably menacing. He was telling her, in no uncertain terms, that her act of heroism had made her a liability, and that her silence was now mandatory. Sarah looked at the general, at his unyielding face, at the two silent, imposing figures behind him. She looked at the non-disclosure agreement in her hands, her name already filled in. She felt a profound sense of helplessness. Against this level of power, what could she do? She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. And if I don't sign? Thorne's expression didn't change, but his eyes conveyed a message far more potent than any words. I wouldn't advise that, Miss Jenkins. For your own good, and for the good of those you care about. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Sarah signed the document, her hand shaking. It felt like she was signing away a part of herself, a part of her truth. General Thorne took the signed document, gave her one last, piercing look, then turned and exited her apartment, followed by his silent entourage. The door clicked shut, leaving Sarah alone in the sudden, echoing silence. She stood there for a long moment, the weight of their visit pressing down on her. Her initial hopeful flutter had dissolved into a bitter, cold ache. They hadn't come to thank her. They had come to intimidate her, to silence her, to punish her for being a hero. The next morning, Sarah dragged herself to St. Jude's, feeling the weight of the general's visit like a shroud. Her usual morning ritual, grabbing coffee, chatting with colleagues, felt impossible. She simply couldn't shake the unsettling feeling of being watched, of having her simple act twisted into something sinister. She kept replaying the general's words. You interfered with a military asset, compromised a sensitive situation. What did you take? The non-disclosure agreement felt like a brand on her conscience. She was barely through the automatic doors when she saw the head of her department, nurse manager Elaine Davies, waiting for her. Elaine's face, usually a picture of calm efficiency, was creased with worry. Sarah, thank God you're here. Mr. Henderson wants to see you. Now. Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator. A man whose natural habitat was a sterile office, rather than the messy reality of the ER. A man who valued policy, cost-cutting, and public image above all else. His very name sent a chill down Sarah's spine. This couldn't be good. She followed Elaine through the bustling corridors, the familiar sounds of beeping machines and urgent whispers a stark contrast to the quiet dread building within her. Elaine pressed a sympathetic hand to Sarah's arm. I heard about the accident and about Officer Miller's report. Don't let him rattle you. We all know what you did was incredible. But the reassurance did little to quell Sarah's anxiety. If Officer Miller had filed a report, and if Mr. Henderson was involved, this was going to be worse than she thought. Henderson's office was predictably sparse and meticulously organized. He sat behind a large mahogany desk, his face pinched with annoyance. Beside him, in a stiff-backed chair, sat a woman Sarah vaguely recognized from the hospital's legal department, her expression equally grim. Officer Miller's report, a thin folder, lay open on Henderson's desk. Miss Jenkins, Henderson began, not bothering with a greeting, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. Thank you for coming, though I suspect you already know why you're here. Sarah remained silent, bracing herself. We have received a highly concerning report from the city police department, Henderson continued, tapping the folder with a manicured finger. It alleges that you, while off duty, intervened in a serious traffic accident, performing medical procedures outside of a sanctioned hospital environment without proper authority, and apparently on a sensitive military individual. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, thick with accusation. Sarah felt her blood pressure rise. Mr. Henderson, she began, trying to keep her voice even. I pulled a man from a burning car. He was seconds from death. There was no time to wait for. No time to wait for paramedics, Miss Jenkins? Henderson interrupted, his tone condescending. No time to wait for a fully equipped emergency response team? Do you realize the liability you expose this hospital to? Do you realize the legal ramifications of a registered nurse, acting outside of her employment, intervening in what a police officer has deemed a potential crime scene? The legal woman nodded gravely beside him. This was a tag team. Liability? Sarah exploded, unable to contain her indignation any longer. A man was dying? My training compelled me to act? Are you telling me Street Jude's policy is to let people burn to death in ditches if it's outside hospital property? Henderson slammed his hand lightly on the desk, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet room. Do not presume to put words in my mouth, Miss Jenkins. Our policy is to follow procedure. Our policy is to protect our assets, our employees, and our reputation. Your reckless behavior has jeopardized all three. He stood up, pacing agitatedly behind his desk. Officer Miller's report mentions you contaminating a potential crime scene, bypassing established emergency protocols, and even ignoring direct orders from law enforcement. And now, to compound matters, we've received an inquiry from military channels regarding your involvement with Corporal Evans. An inquiry, Miss Jenkins, that explicitly questioned your unauthorized access to a military individual. Do you know what that means for us? Do you? Sarah felt a wave of nausea. The general. He hadn't just silenced her. He had started a chain reaction of official disapproval. This was his veiled threat made real. They're trying to cover something up, Mr. Henderson, Sarah pleaded, trying to appeal to his humanity, if he had any. The general implied as much. He didn't want anyone to know about the Marine or what was in his car. They made me sign an NDA, Henderson scoffed. NDA? Miss Jenkins, with all due respect, your narrative sounds rather fantastical. We are dealing with facts, Officer Miller's report, and the fact that you, an employee of this hospital, acted in a manner that directly contravenes hospital policy regarding off-duty interventions and has now drawn unwanted military attention to our institution. The legal woman finally spoke, her voice measured, but firm. Miss Jenkins, the nursing board has been notified. Given the severity of the allegations and the potential for significant legal exposure for Street Jude's, we have no choice but to place you on immediate administrative leave without pay, pending a full review by the board. Sarah stared at them, her mouth agape. Without pay? Are you serious? I saved a man's life and you're suspending me? Her voice cracked with disbelief. You're punishing me for being a nurse? For doing what is right? We are enforcing hospital policy, Miss Jenkins, Henderson said, his voice cold. Your heroic intentions are not up for debate. Your adherence to Professional Conduct Island? You are to surrender your hospital ID and your access key immediately. You will be contacted by the board in due course. Sarah felt a profound sense of shock followed by a burning wave of righteous fury. This was rage bait, pure and simple. Her act of compassion, her sacrifice, was being twisted, contorted, and used against her by the very systems designed to uphold order and care. This bureaucratic nightmare was designed to crush her, to make her regret her heroism. She stood up, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. You know what? Fine. Keep your ID, keep your access key. But don't you dare pretend this is about policy. This is about covering your own asses and letting a military general bully you into it. This is disgusting. She ripped off her ID badge, tossing it onto Henderson's desk with a clatter, then turned and walked out, not waiting for their response. She walked past Elaine, whose face was etched with sympathy and powerlessness, and out of the hospital, feeling utterly alone, adrift, and incandescent with anger. Her first instinct was to check on Corporal Evans. She pulled out her phone, determined to get an update on his condition. She called the ER, explaining who she was, asking about the Marine she'd brought in. "I'm sorry, Miss Jenkins," the charge nurse said, her voice tight, "but Corporal Evans' records have been sealed. He was transferred this morning to a military medical facility. We're not authorized to release any information." Another wall, another layer of silence. The general's machinations were far-reaching. Not only was she suspended, but the very person she had saved was now beyond her reach, his fate shrouded in secrecy. The injustice of it all felt like a physical weight in her chest. She had saved him, and now she was being erased from his story, from the official record, punished for her very existence in the narrative. She went home, the silence of her apartment amplifying her despair and growing rage. Her phone was dead. She plugged it in, watching it flicker to life. A single text message from an unknown number. Loose lips, sink ships, nurse. A cold dread seeped into her bones. They were watching her. The general's threat, the suspension, the sealed records, the anonymous text, it was all connected. They wanted her gone. They wanted her silent. But why? What was so important about Corporal Evans and that burning car that they were willing to demonize a hero to keep it quiet? She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. Soot-stained, tired, but a defiant fire was starting to burn in her eyes. She wasn't just angry, she was furious. And with that fury came a grim resolve. They wanted her to disappear. They wanted her to forget. But Sarah Jenkins had just been pushed too far. Days blurred into a frustrating, humiliating monotony. Sarah, accustomed to the relentless pace of the ER, found herself adrift in the sudden void of unemployment. The silence of her apartment was deafening, broken only by the occasional, unwelcome thought of her dwindling savings. Her phone, now fully charged, remained stubbornly silent. No calls from the nursing board, no word from Officer Miller, no follow-up from the mysterious military channels. It was a calculated isolation, designed to make her feel forgotten, insignificant, and ultimately to make her give up. But the rage, far from fading, simmered beneath the surface, a persistent, uncomfortable heat. She kept replaying Henderson's condescending tone, Miller's accusatory glares, and General Thorne's chilling threat. What did you take? The question echoed loudest, a discordant note in the symphony of her indignation. One afternoon, in a fit of restless energy, she finally tackled the pile of laundry that had accumulated since the accident. She picked up her soot-stained scrubs, the fabric still stiff with dried grime. She paused, her fingers tracing the faint burn marks on the sleeve where the flames had licked too close. As she crumpled the fabric to toss it into the washing machine, her fingers brushed against something hard in the front pocket, a small metallic object. Her heart leaped into her throat. She pulled it out. It was a USB drive. Not a cheap plastic one, but a sleek, heavy-duty device, military green in color, with a faint scorch mark along one edge. It was utterly devoid of labels or markings. What did you take? The general's words hit her with the force of a physical blow. This was what he was looking for. This was what Corporal Evans had been carrying. This was what made her a liability. The USB drive felt cold and heavy in her palm, a tiny key to a massive, hidden door. This wasn't just about her suspension anymore. This wasn't just about injustice. This was about something far, far bigger. What could be on this drive that the military was willing to go to such lengths to intimidate a civilian, to silence a hero, to possibly orchestrate a deadly crash to retrieve? Her initial confusion dissolved, replaced by a searing clarity. They weren't just punishing her for interfering. They were trying to recover this. And they were actively trying to keep her from connecting the dots. A new purpose, sharp and undeniable, ignited within her. She had saved Corporal Evans' life. Now, she might have the means to understand why his life was in such danger, and why her act of saving him had unleashed such a torrent of official fury. She stared at the USB drive, a powerful sense of dread mingling with an unyielding determination. She couldn't just turn this over. Not after what they'd done to her. Not after what they'd done to Evans. But what could she do with it? She wasn't a hacker. She wasn't a spy. She was a nurse. Then, a name surfaced in her mind. Her brother, Leo. Estranged, cynical, and utterly brilliant with computers. Leo Jenkins, the disgraced tech journalist. His last big scoop, a massive data breach involving a major corporation, had been pulled from publication at the last minute, ostensibly due to national security concerns. He'd accused the government of censorship, lost his job, and now ran a small, independent blog from his perpetually messy apartment, subsisting on ramen noodles and caffeine. She hadn't spoken to him in months, not since their last explosive argument about his conspiracy theories versus her naive faith in the system. The irony was not lost on her now. The system had just shown its true colors. Swallowing her pride and a healthy dose of trepidation, she picked up her phone. She hesitated over his contact, then pressed dial. Leo answered on the third ring, his voice raspy. "Hello? Who is this? If this is another spam call about my car's extended warranty, I swear to God." "Leo, it's Sarah," she interrupted, her voice tight. A beat of surprised silence. "Sarah? Wow. To what do I owe the distinct pleasure? Did you finally decide the government is actually run by lizard people?" His sarcasm, as always, was thick enough to cut with a knife. "No, Leo. I need your help. It's important. Really important." She briefly explained the accident, the rescue, the general's visit, her suspension, and finally, the discovery of the USB drive. She left out the anonymous text, not wanting to panic him unnecessarily. There was another long pause on his end. "Wait, you pulled a Marine from a burning car, and the military is punishing you for it? And a general showed up at your door, and you found a secret military USB drive?" He sounded less sarcastic now, more intrigued, a professional hunger stirring beneath his cynical shell. "Are you making this up, Sarah? Because this is a story." "I wish I were, Leo," she said, her voice heavy. "I've been suspended without pay. The hospital threw me under the bus to protect their liability. They sealed the Marines' records. They want me quiet." "Okay," he said slowly, his tone shifting. This was the Leo she remembered, the one who smelled a rat a mile away. "Okay, this sounds legitimately messed up. Bring it over. Bring the drive, and tell me everything, from the beginning. Every single detail." Relief, sharp and sudden, washed over Sarah. She wasn't alone. She had an ally, a highly skilled, if socially abrasive, ally. She drove to Leo's apartment, a cramped space overflowing with computers, monitors, and takeout containers. He met her at the door, his usual disheveled self, but with a new intensity in his eyes. "Show me," he said, holding out a hand for the drive. Sarah handed it over, the weight of its potential secrets feeling heavier than ever. "Be careful, Leo. The general." He was menacing. "I think this might be bigger than we know." Leo plugged the drive into a specialized port on one of his custom-built computers. A complex array of encryption software immediately popped up on his screen. "Oh, she's a pretty one," he murmured, his fingers already flying across the keyboard, a familiar, almost obsessive focus taking over. Military grade. Impressive. He spent hours trying to crack the code, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sarah watched, a nervous knot in her stomach. She told him every detail, from the moment she saw the black sedan to the general's veiled threats. Leo listened intently, interjecting with sharp, insightful questions. "So, the black sedan just happened to bone him?" Leo mused, leaning back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "And the general was more concerned about sensitive information than his soldiers' well-being? And they silenced you immediately? This doesn't smell like an accident, Sarah. It smells like a hit. A very, very botched hit." His words sent a fresh wave of chills down Sarah's spine. A hit? An attempted murder? The thought was horrifying, but terrifyingly plausible. Corporal Evans hadn't just been in an accident. He had been targeted. And she, by pulling him from the burning car, had unwittingly interfered with a deadly operation. The implications were staggering. It meant General Thorne wasn't just protecting national security, he was covering up a crime. And now, she and Leo were about to expose it. For 2 agonizing days, Leo worked non-stop, fueled by cold coffee and a journalist's insatiable hunger for the truth. Sarah hovered, offering moral support, sometimes just sitting in quiet solidarity, watching the complex algorithms and lines of code scroll across his multiple monitors. The encrypted drive was a fortress, its defenses layered and sophisticated. But Leo, in his element, was a relentless besieger. Finally, on the evening of the second day, a small, triumphant "Aha!" escaped Leo's lips. His fingers danced across the keyboard, a series of commands flashing across the screen. A new window opened, displaying a file directory. The fortress had fallen. "We're in," Leo announced, his voice hushed with a mixture of excitement and awe. He looked at Sarah, his eyes wide. "Get ready, sis. I think we just hit the jackpot." Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. The screen showed a jumble of files, mostly technical reports and financial documents, but a few folders were conspicuously labeled Project Sentinel and Whistleblower Data. Leo opened the Whistleblower Data folder first. Inside, there were thousands of files. Internal memos, procurement contracts, testing results, and highly damning photographs. He started clicking through them, his expression growing grimmer with each new document. "Oh my God," Leo breathed, his voice barely audible. "Sarah, this is big. This is massive." Sarah peered over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the documents. The words started to swim before her eyes. Ballistic failure rate, compromised integrity, substandard materials, procurement fraud, and then the photos. Images of soldiers in body armor, riddled with bullet holes, lying dead in dusty, anonymous landscapes. Another showed a laboratory report, highlighting a specific batch of ceramic plates. "What is it, Leo?" she whispered, a sickening dread coiling in her stomach. He turned to her, his face pale. "This drive contains evidence that a major defense contractor, Aegis Defense Systems, has been knowingly supplying faulty body armor to frontline U.S. troops. Not just faulty, Sarah, deliberately substandard. They cut corners on materials, manipulated testing results, all to boost profits." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Faulty body armor? People died because of this?" "Dozens from the looks of these reports," Leo confirmed, his voice heavy. "And the general, Thorne, he's connected. Look at these emails. He was aware of the early warning signs, the complaints from the field. He buried them. He actively stifled investigations to protect Aegis defense, probably because of lucrative contracts and possibly personal kickbacks. Corporal Evans, he wasn't just a Marine. He was a whistleblower. He was on his way to leak this entire data dump when his car was T-boned. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The general's cold, calculated interrogation, the sensitive mission, the sealed records, the military asset that was not the Marine himself, but the information he carried. Thorne hadn't just been trying to recover classified data. He'd been trying to suppress evidence of his own complicity in a scandal that amounted to mass murder. And the car crash? Leo's earlier theory echoed in her mind. A botched hit. "They tried to kill him," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with a terrible certainty. "The black sedan. It wasn't an accident. They tried to kill Corporal Evans to stop him from exposing this, and I pulled him out. I messed up their plan." Leo nodded, his gaze fixed on the screen, scrolling through more evidence of corruption and deceit. "You didn't mess up their plan, Sarah. You saved his life, and you inadvertently got your hands on the proof they were willing to kill for. This isn't just a story anymore. This is a matter of life and death for potentially thousands of soldiers, and for us now." His words sent a cold shiver down Sarah's spine. They were now holding evidence that implicated a powerful general and a massive defense contractor in a scheme that had cost American soldiers their lives. They weren't just innocent bystanders anymore. They were targets. As if on cue, a sudden flicker. The lights in Leo's apartment dimmed momentarily, then brightened again. His internet connection icon flickered, then reconnected. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. Leo's eyes, sharp with suspicion, darted to his network diagnostics. "Could be the old wiring in this building, or it could be someone trying to get in, trying to see what we're doing, trying to find this." He tapped the monitor, where the damning documents were still displayed. A prickle of paranoia began to crawl up Sarah's spine. She remembered the anonymous text message, "Loose lips sink ship's nurse." and the unsettling feeling of being watched since the general's visit. "Leo," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think they know we have it, or at least, they know we're looking. I think they've been watching me since the general left." He nodded slowly. "Makes sense. They wouldn't just trust you to stay silent. They'd monitor you. And now, they've probably pinged your brother, the infamous tech journalist who's always digging where he shouldn't." They both looked towards the window, dark and reflective, showing nothing but their own anxious faces. But the silence outside felt heavy, charged. Was that a shadow moving on the street below? Or just her imagination, fueled by fear? "We need a plan," Sarah said, her voice firm despite the fear. Her nurse's instinct for problem-solving, for triage, kicked in. The initial shock was giving way to a fierce determination. They were in danger, yes, but they also held the power to expose a monstrous injustice. "Yeah," Leo agreed, closing the files and disconnecting the USB drive, his usual cynicism replaced by a grim resolve. "A plan! One that gets this out, and one that keeps us alive." The gravity of their situation settled over them, a heavy, suffocating blanket. They had stumbled into a war, not with guns and bullets, but with truth and lies. And the stakes, they now realized, were far higher than either of them could have ever imagined. The USB drive, now a loaded gun, lay heavy on Leo's desk. Its contents seared into Sarah's mind. The faces of dead soldiers, the cold corporate greed, Thorne's complicity. The choice before them was stark and terrifying. They could return the drive, hope to disappear, and live with the monstrous secret. Or they could risk everything to expose the truth. Sarah looked at the drive, then at Leo, whose face was a mirror of her own conflicted emotions. Fear was a palpable presence in the room, but beneath it, a slow-burning fire of resolve was hardening in Sarah's gut. Her oath as a nurse, to advocate for the vulnerable, to alleviate suffering, resonated deeper than any fear. She had saved Corporal Evans from a burning car. How could she now let the architects of his near death, and the deaths of countless others, go unpunished? "We can't just walk away, Leo," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not after this. Not after what's on that drive. How many more soldiers will die if we do nothing?" Leo, surprisingly, didn't argue. His journalistic instincts, long dormant under a layer of cynicism, had been fully reawakened by the sheer audacity of the cover-up. "No," he agreed, his gaze steady. "We can't. But we need to be smart about this. They're watching us. We can't just blast this out." A desperate, audacious idea began to form in Sarah's mind. She knew who the true villain was. General Marcus Thorne. He was the linchpin, the man who had ordered her silence, the man who had protected the corrupt. She had to face him directly. "I need to talk to General Thorne," she announced, the words feeling alien and dangerous even to her own ears. Leo stared at her, aghast. "Are you insane? He's a 3-star general. He tried to intimidate you. He's probably behind the crash." "Exactly," Sarah countered, her jaw set. "He's the one who stands to lose the most, and he's the one who might, just might, still have a shred of conscience beneath all that rank and protocol. If I can get him to admit what he knows, even subtly, or scare him enough to stop fighting us." Her nurse's mind, always focused on the most direct path to treatment, saw this as a necessary, albeit terrifying, surgical strike. She would use the drive as bait. She would force a confrontation. Using an encrypted burner phone Leo had acquired, Sarah sent a carefully worded anonymous message to General Thorne's secure military email address. An address Leo had painstakingly dug up from the drive's metadata. The message was simple. "I know about Project Sentinel. I know about Aegis. I know about Corporal Evans. We need to talk. Alone. Your next move decides everything." She included a coded snippet of data from the drive, just enough to prove she wasn't bluffing. A few tense hours later, a response. A time. A remote, non-military location. Thorne was taking the bait. Sarah dressed in her cleanest, most professional clothes, not her scrubs. She wanted to look not like a victim, but an adversary. She looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection showing a woman tired, scared, but utterly resolved. "Be careful, Sarah," Leo said, his voice unusually soft as he handed her a small, discreet audio recorder. "Don't trust him for a second. Get everything on this, and if you're not back in 2 hours, I'm releasing everything. To everyone." She nodded, took a deep breath, and walked out the door, the weight of not just the drive but the lives it represented resting on her shoulders. She was going to face the general, armed only with a truth he desperately wanted buried, and her unwavering moral compass. The meeting with General Thorne was held in a nondescript, dimly lit coffee shop, deserted save for a lone barista, discreetly wiping down counters. Thorne, in civilian clothes, looked less imposing but no less formidable. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something Sarah hadn't seen before. Apprehension. She laid the USB drive on the table between them, a small, innocent-looking object brimming with explosive truth. "General," she began, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands beneath the table. "You wanted to know what I took from Corporal Evans' car. It was this." Thorne's gaze fixed on the drive, then on her. The mask of controlled anger returned, but it was tinged with fear. "You have no idea what you're toying with, Miss Jenkins. This is classified material. State secrets." "State secrets about soldiers dying because of faulty equipment, General?" Sarah retorted, her voice rising in passion. "Secrets about a defense contractor sacrificing lives for profit? Secrets about your own command ignoring the warnings? Corporal Evans tried to expose this, and you tried to cover it up. You tried to silence him, just like you tried to silence me." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "You took an oath to protect your soldiers, General. This paperwork proves you've been protecting the people who are getting them killed. Corporal Evans almost died for this. How many more have to?" Her simple, direct appeal cut through his military bluster, hitting at the core of his presumed honor. A muscle twitched in Thorne's jaw. He picked up the drive, weighed it in his hand. He looked at Sarah, a long, assessing gaze that seemed to peel back layers of his hardened exterior. The fight, the indignation, the fear, all swirled within him. He was trapped. "What do you want, Miss Jenkins?" he finally asked, his voice low, resigned. "Justice," Sarah replied without hesitation. "For the soldiers who died. For Corporal Evans. For the truth to come out." She gestured to the recorder, subtly visible in her pocket. "Leo has copies. If anything happens to either of us, it goes public. Everything." Thorne swallowed hard. He knew he was beaten. The choice was no longer between covering it up and exposure, but between controlled exposure and utter ruin. He looked down at the drive, then up at her. In that moment, something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of shame, a recognition of the terrible burden he had carried. The story broke 2 days later. Leo, true to his word, had uploaded the entire data dump to his blog, along with Sarah's harrowing account and Thorne's tacit confession. It went viral, picked up by every major news outlet. A firestorm erupted. The images of dead soldiers in faulty armor, the cold corporate memos, the general's complicity, it painted a horrifying picture of corruption at the highest levels. A massive investigation was launched. Executives at Aegis Defense Systems were swiftly indicted, their stock plummeting to ruin. General Thorne, facing court-martial, eventually provided crucial testimony to investigators, saving his career but tarnishing his legacy forever. He was honorably discharged, but his public reputation was decimated. The city nursing board, overwhelmed by public outrage and the undeniable evidence of Sarah's heroism, swiftly dismissed the complaint against her. Mr. Henderson, the epitome of bureaucratic cowardice, was forced to issue a humiliating public apology, citing a misunderstanding of protocols and offering Sarah a promotion and a significant raise. She politely declined. Street Judes didn't feel like home anymore. The story, however, didn't end with recrimination. Sarah became a national hero. Interviews, awards, speaking engagements, but the only recognition that truly mattered to her was a visit she made, weeks later, to the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. She found Corporal David Evans in a rehabilitation ward, his legs still in a brace, but his eyes bright and clear. He was recovering. He looked up as she entered, a quiet smile spreading across his face. "Nurse Jenkins," he said, his voice still a little hoarse but filled with immense gratitude. "I heard you had quite the week because of me." Sarah smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile. "You could say that, Corporal. I'm just glad you're okay." He reached out a hand, and she took it, her fingers intertwining with his. "Thank you," he said, his gaze unwavering. "For everything. For saving me, and for saving so many others." In that moment, all the frustration, the anger, the fear, the unjust punishment faded into insignificance. Her single, selfless act of compassion, performed on a rain-slicked highway, had not only saved one life, but had sparked a chain reaction that brought down a corrupt system and protected countless more. She was a nurse, and she had, against all odds, truly healed.